This is the Drake Insights Podcast, your weekly dose of cutting-edge senior living marketing insights. Join me, your host, Natasha Drake, for bold ideas, proven strategies, and inspiring stories straight from the experts. Tune in and let's conquer the senior living marketing landscape together. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the Drake Insights Podcast. I'm your host, Natasha Drake from Drake Strategic. Let's get started. So on today's episode, I am so excited to welcome back the wonderful Morgan Lamphere. Thank you so much for coming back on the show. You know, Morgan and I think we shared on the last episode we were together. You know, we kind of went through similar things early on, started our companies around the same time, and we didn't know each other before, but we got to know each other over the past almost 3 years now, I think it's been, and just kind of stayed in touch and sharing the journey of life with our families and our kids and businesses and all that. And if you don't know her, welcome, Morgan, and she's now the director of marketing for Kendal. And so excited for you. Congrats on that. I know you guys are doing amazing things. And so I wanted to bring her on this time to share with you this really impactful story that I was not aware of until you shared it with me. But really, Kendal went through this huge brand refresh. And I want to kind of kick us off for a second before I let you introduce yourself with, this isn't just a marketing design brand refresh. This is not what we're talking about. This is a company that's been around for over 50 years. And this is a big deal, as we wanted to make sure, I say we, as I feel like I'm a part of it, but you wanted to make sure in your team that, culturally it stayed the same, but it was modernized, refreshed, and you'll go into all the details. But that's really hard to do if you have a long-standing company, organization, who has a lot of different affiliates. You've got a lot of residents, families, staff, team, and I feel when she tells her story, it will help you understand how to do something like this. What does that process look like? What is the time frame of that? What does that mean to everyone involved? And so thank you so much for coming on and sharing this with everyone. I know everyone listening, you're going to hear things that maybe you hadn't thought about when you think of a quick, it's just a brand update. No, this infiltrates the whole organization, and I'm just so grateful that you are coming on the show to share this with us. And if you can if for those that don't know you, a little introduction of yourself.
Sure, Natasha, it's so good to see you again, and thank you for allowing me to come back. It's always a pleasure to talk to you a little bit more, and I love that we have so many intersecting paths of sales and marketing and client experience, and I'm just thrilled to be at Kendal. I'm now coming up on, almost 8 months in my role at Kendal. I started in October of last year as the Senior Director of Marketing, and it's been a wonderful journey so far. It's an organization that I've known throughout my career in senior living for the past really 20 years. But the organization, of course, has been around for over 50 years, as you said. And I'm hesitant to say it was a culture change when this evolution was happening, because I would certainly say that there's no way to really change the culture of Kendal. It's been Kendal for 50 years, and that's something that we absolutely want to celebrate. And so I'm pleased to be here and excited to share more about what's going on at our organization and where we go from here.
So maybe you can kind of set the stage for everyone. So like you just mentioned, Kendal has been around for a very long time. I believe everyone listening, it's a very well-known organization. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's, they know certain things maybe about the organization they don't know. But what prompted this, this initial brand refresh? Why did Kendal want to do this now?
Yeah, well, I'll start with, maybe people don't know about Kendal. And the organization, just so that everyone does know, is an organization that is focused on senior living. And primarily, the Kendal Corporation is made up of different affiliates throughout the U.S. that primarily are life plan communities, not-for-profit life plan communities. We have 10 not-for-profit life plan communities that are part of the affiliate structure. And then we also have Kendal at Home, which is an organization that supports a CCRC at home contract. And that service is available in Ohio, Northern Kentucky, and Massachusetts. So it really is a varied organization with a storied history. It started 50 years ago. And the organization is rooted in Quaker values. It started in Pennsylvania, as you could probably imagine, right around the corner. And the organization started with this idea of transforming the experience of aging for older adults and really thinking about how you can provide Quaker values throughout a system of independent affiliates. And so that's what Kendal does is as an organization, we support these affiliates, but they're all independent. And we call it a federated structure. We want the affiliates to all be independent, thriving, self-supporting, not-for-profit organizations. And then as a corporation, the Kendal Corporation provides overall support, management support, financial support. We also provide technology and marketing support. And about 2 years ago, our CEO, Vassar Bird, came to the leadership team and came to the CEOs of the organization to say, this brand, this look of Kendal, the feel of Kendal, it's gone through some pretty significant changes as an organization over the past few years. But the creative aspect of the brand, the look of the brand, none of that's really been touched since 2012. And so she charged at that time the marketing leaders with, we need to go through a brand refresh. And of course, at that time, the first thing people think about is, okay, well, maybe we need a new logo and some new colors. And what the team does is, of course, we do everything through collaboration and consensus. That's part of our Quaker values. And they started with our brand ambassadors, marketing directors all throughout the system, and asked them, what does a brand refresh mean to you? What does that really look like? And of course, the marketing directors came back to say, this is a lot more than just a new logo. We need to actually look inward and think about some of our different audiences and think about what the brand says to them. And so that's really where the process started, was listening intently to all of the different audiences that Kendal interacts with. Prospective team members, prospective residents, team members, our leaders that we work with. And that's really where the process got started.
Yeah. So one of my next questions, and you kind of touched on this, but yeah, how this evolution of you can't just, go ahead and change everything, right? Because Kendal has so much history there and so much culture built there. So talk a little bit about that, about, it wasn't just like we can't just leave the history behind. We have to sort of evolve it, and how that was brought in, as well as, I know we'll go into this a little bit more, but like keeping some of that mission and tagline. I know, just touch on that a little bit if you can, about, how did you decide like what needed to stay and what needed to evolve?
Yeah, well, first of all, we decided from the very beginning that the tagline and the mission of the organization was not going to change. Everything that we do revolves around a very simple mission statement: together transforming the experience of aging. And everything that we do points toward that mission and will continue to point toward that mission. What we did discover early in the process, though, is that that mission and the brand promise that we have resonates deeply with residents. But it doesn't have that same level of resonance with team members. And so that got us really thinking about a challenge that all senior living organizations are facing right now. We may have very high demand from residents, and of course we all know about the increasing aging population, but we don't have that same level of demand for job seekers and for recruitment. And so when we really think about what this brand, what the Kendal brand means to our different audiences, we really dug into that brand promise and what some of the elements of the brand meant to those key audience members. So we heard some things from residents that you would probably expect, that there's a deep magnetism to the organization. They feel very proud of where they want to be and where they live. And they also feel a very strong sense of autonomy. That was something that was discovered over the past 10 years. Where we really found some opportunity is that same sense of autonomy, our team members wanted to feel more of that too. And so that's really where we really kind of dug in from a culture perspective to understand what are some ways that we can bring that autonomy back to team members so that they still feel like that same kind of agency and that same level of control that of course we all want to feel as humans.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because I think I would say, I obviously do marketing and design, worked in agency most of my life, and many times when organizations come to you wanting a brand refresh or a brand update or whatever it might be, or from scratch, I don't necessarily think, you go in, you do your interviews, your discovery sessions, you kind of dig in from that perspective. But I think most people focus on externally, right? How is this going to appear? How is this going to be perceived against the competition or the market? Yeah, you wanted to make sure it reflects your values and your mission. But I just think what's so interesting here that I loved from your story when we talked last week is really just how it was more about, yes, external is important, of course, but internal, and how much you guys put a focus on both of that. And I'm not here to say that most organizations don't do that. I just think maybe it's secondary, or it's sort of this is what we're going to do. We have to do this from an external standpoint. We need to make sure we're attracting the right person, right? So it's very much on that. The reason is this external, and then we want your buy-in internal. Was here it was really about, no, we need our brand and our look, yes, to be modernized, but to reflect who we are internally. Thus, that will help externally. And I just wanted to kind of say that out loud, because I think a lot of people listening from a marketing agency perspective think we do this. And we do in theory, but I don't think as deeply as you did here. I mean, when you'll go through a little more detail of the involvement and the process and the timeline. And yeah, you guys took a really deliberate approach to this. And I think that speaks volumes for who you are as an organization too. So one of the next questions I wanted to ask is, so this is more than just a logo, right? So this is really a brand evolution. Like we said, everyone calls it like a brand refresh. They think it's like the design, the logo, and so on and so forth. But is there anything else you wanted to add to this here? You kind of talked about it a little bit in the beginning, but about specifically the heritage of Kendal, what you were trying to reflect in this experience, like what you were trying to do overall outside of just that look.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing that has struck me about the organization that I don't know if everyone knows this, but I just find this to be fascinating about our organization. And there's a personal connection for me. Back in the 90s, it was considered completely commonplace that if a resident had a risk of falling, they should be restrained. If you were, potentially had a risk of getting out of their wheelchair and walking around and falling down, it was totally normal at that time that you would put a jerry chair on. And I remember my grandmother lived in a nursing home in Pittsburgh for many, many years, very sedated toward the end of her life for about 4 years. And she always had a jerry chair. She had that big heavy tray across her lap, so she couldn't get out of that chair because, God forbid, she would have gotten up and who knows, when it started that she was in that chair and to the point at the end of her life where she was no longer able to stand up on her own. And of course, nowadays we would look back to that and be horrified that that's how we treated residents in nursing homes. And Kendal actually led the initiative to go to restraint-free living. And at that time, it was considered really radical that, wow, we're going to actually, what kind of license, what kind of risk are our communities taking on? But we led that charge and now are very well known for having really led the charge to restraint-free living, which we now know is completely pervasive throughout all care throughout the United States. Thank goodness. And now, as an organization, we're thinking about other ways. What's the next cutting edge? And of course, technology is on everybody's mind and how we're going to leverage technology to take better care of people. But also dementia inclusion is another thought that Kendal's really looking into deeply, researching and really leading through initiatives to how can we use technology to provide dementia inclusive environments, perhaps instead of a restrained, locked facility. And I think that's maybe the next place that the organization gets to go. And it's those types of really forward-thinking concepts that I think will always keep an organization like Kendal really on that front edge. And when we thought about the brand and what all of this means, we really think about, if we're that organization, we want our brand to reflect that. And in some ways, our brand hadn't really been touched for many, many years. And so there were some, not necessarily older fashioned, but it was time for some modern elements to be introduced. And so it was really through some of these conversations and through a deep look of history that helped us get to the point of what does a more modern, a more up-to-date, a more vital brand look like? And taking those ideas and concepts and actually putting them into hard graphics, creative graphics that we could share throughout the affiliates so that they could really put their own spin on things.
Yeah, and I do want to dig into that. So I want you to walk through, if you can, in a second, the actual process that you went through, and then we'll dig into some further questions. But one of them is specifically that federated organization that you talk about, because that brings a whole different spin on this, right? This isn't like one brand, great. It's like we need this to be cohesive, but we also want everyone to feel like they are who they are at the same time. And I want to also, when Morgan and I spoke last week, I talked about this. I asked about this question because when I come in sometimes, that's a struggle because you want to change a brand and you want not change, refresh and modernize. But many times when you have locations all over the nation, right, they are Kendal and who they are, but they're also custom and have those specific strengths to that specific community. It's very difficult in what you do outside of, your events and your messaging, but in a brand, how do you do that? So I want you to dig into that in a second, but maybe we can start off with just talking about the federated organizations, what that looked like, that process. And then if you can walk us through, what was the process? If you can kind of, you don't have to go into every detail, but through the beginning of this idea, what was that process and what did it look like?
Yeah, so the organization contracted with an agency called Brand Metal. And actually, since the process started, Brand Metal has gone through their own brand refresh, and they're now known as Metal 5. And Metal 5, or Brand Metal, essentially led the organization through a series of very intensive listening workshops. And during those listening workshops, they were really listening to our different audiences, leaders, team members, prospective residents, really kind of listening to all of those different perspectives to understand what makes Kendal different, what's unique about your organization, what's unique about the organization as a whole, so that they could really start to define the distinctness of Kendal and what really does make our brand special. And through those brand promises, that's where the brand elements really came to light. So the workshops really took place over the course of 8 or 9 months. And then Brand Metal took that information and put together really what we felt were our brand promises. So those topics like the values and autonomy, independence was very, very important. We heard that every single affiliate feels like they are the flagship affiliate. And that's a great goal to aspire to, that every affiliate feels like we're the best one. We are the best one, and we have intensive pride. So Brand Metal actually came back to us and said, this is one of the hardest brand evolutions or brand refreshes we've ever done, because the uniqueness of every affiliate is so important. We don't want to lose that, but we want to try to find this element that's going to pull everybody together in the same place. And so part of that effort was to really develop a brand mark that could be used to really signify the whole organization. And so originally, our original brand mark back in 2012 was very simply a white K on a green background. And we really couldn't use that brand mark alongside all of the names of the organizations, because then it would become Kendal, K and Kendal at all of the names. And so we really did need to think of a graphic element. And Brand Metal developed an element that they really felt represented the Quaker values, a very simple single line drawing. It was a modern element. It brought a new color to the logo, some brightness and some vitality to the logo. And it really was more of an abstract nod to a K. We now kind of refer to that as our special K, because we thought it was pretty neat, very avant-garde. We came to a conclusion from a leadership team, from a TKC board. We all came to think, okay, this is our brand mark. We started to share it with marketing directors. They were excited about it. And when we shared it to the CEOs, we came to a screeching halt. They hated it. And so it was really at that point in the process that we had to say, okay, let's really think about the work that Brand Metal has done. Where have we really hit this right on the mark? Can we come to some consensus on the different elements of the work that we've done? And then perhaps really hone in on, okay, where are we not happy? What's not resonating with our audience? And make some adjustments. And so that's part of the process, listening, learning, making some adjustments along the way. And that's what's really gotten us to this point where we now have a new brand mark. We were able to regroup, come back to the team with some other options, and really have what we think is a perfect representation of the organization with what we refer to as the Trillium, this three-leaved brand element that really represents all of the parts of Kendal working.
And I'll pull that on the screen too while you're talking, so everyone should be able to see them now. I want to go back for a second. I think maybe I missed this early on, is talk about that listening that you just mentioned, that radical listening you've talked about. And I think maybe you touched on it, but I want everyone to really hear how many people were involved in this. This wasn't just high level leadership, because many times you get that, right? You get, okay, so even if it's federated, okay, we'll just have the high level leadership. What impacted me was all the different groups you had involved and the listening that was involved. I want everyone to hear exactly what that looked like.
Well, and it's kind of an interesting part about how decisions get made at Kendal. And a lot of people have this perception that, okay, at Kendal, it's all consensus-based decision making, which means everybody who's involved has to actually agree before something gets moved forward. And if you can imagine all of the stakeholders at Kendal, all of the residents, all of the board members, everybody that works at TKC, all of our team members, there is absolutely no way I was able to go through, or our team could go through and get a head nod from all of those different stakeholders. So we had to really come from the beginning to understand, how are we going to make this decision? The decision and the branding of Kendal is the responsibility of TKC. But none of those decisions are going to happen in a vacuum. The affiliates have to be an active part. So we really identified our brand ambassadors, our marketing directors. They really led the charge with who are we going to meet with on a local level, what residents are going to be involved, what team members are going to be involved. And they helped us really get that local voice. Once we had a brand to share out and say, okay, we're about 85% done here. Here's the creative concepts. Here's a new logo. Here's the new brand mark. Here's some fonts that we're going to start using. We started to identify stakeholders, which were CEOs of each affiliate, board members from each affiliate, our TKC staff, all worked together in stakeholder meetings over the course of about 2 months. And that work actually helped us get to the finish line a little faster. So sometimes if we're very clear about the decision making from the get-go of who's going to be involved, here's how we're going to do it, that actually helps us get to that conclusion a little faster. And then the buy-in is much more successful. Once we launched in June, everybody knew, okay, this is coming, no surprises, we're ready for it. We can flip over our email signatures. We've got all the tools that we need. Of course, it's going to take a little while to get monument signs and buses rewrapped. We wanted to make sure that that type of work could take its time, but the digital work, really getting the brand out there, we were able to flip the switch pretty easily in June.
Yeah, and I think that's why I wanted you to point that out. Thank you for explaining that, because it wasn't just, CEOs of each one or a small group. As I've seen, I know many people get other people involved, but just how many, residents and families and staff, and so that everyone at each of the different communities knew what was going on, felt that they were a part of this process. This is a whole family, as many communities that we have across the country, all separate federated organizations. Everyone is a part of this process. And it took a long time. Like, that's a lot. I want everyone to hear that time, because many times I hear, how quickly can you get me a brand? And I'm like, this isn't like an overnight thing. Sure, I can slap some designs and hand it to you. You can pick one that you like. That's not what this is about. It's about from the inside out. And I love the way that Kendal did this, is starting from inside. This is all of us. We know we need to do this. Let's go about this together. And the next thing I want to talk about is that special K pivot that you talked about a second ago. I think that's really important, because I see this many times. Different agencies call it different things. The leap, they call it different things, where they have one that's very impactful and maybe a couple that are not as different as the original. And many times it's like, okay, we have A, B, or C, right? This is the big change. This is the medium. This is this changing the same. Pick one. And I'm not saying we don't make edits to that, but I think it's really important of the listening. Many times maybe it's, well, we're the head of the organization. We know what's going to have the most impact. But what is that? That's external. That's you thinking, well, I know externally what's going to work. And it might be right. That special K design may have worked externally. But if you're not going to have, if the team inside, the residents inside don't feel it, then it's going to be broken. It's not going to work. And so I just think that was so interesting to me. You guys put all this work into it. Most of you, I think, liked it, right? You're like, this is cool. This is different. And you listened and you pivoted. And I think now just seeing what you guys came back with here, and I'll put it back up on the screen, it's beautiful what you ended up with by listening. And so many times it's hearing that, taking a minute and a step back, and you're the perfect person for them to do this with them, is just really listening and hearing what they have to say. So I just wanted to pull that to the forefront.
Yeah. And it is kind of interesting looking back in the process. You are 100% right. Brand Metal gave us 3 choices, and choices number 1 and 2, they weren't working from a leadership team perspective. 1 was very, very safe and extremely close to what we already have today. Like, you probably couldn't even tell that we made a change. Choice 2 went very, very feminine. The font was very feminine, the K was very feminine, and it lacked really the strength that we were looking for to put forward as an organization. And so we made the decision to put forth choice 3 as the choice, and not put forth 3 choices and say, pick one. And it is kind of an interesting way, and it goes back to the decision-making process. We are not a democracy. We don't operate as a democracy. We operate as a consensus organization. So we decided it early in the process that this is how the decision was going to be made, of course, listening every step of the way. But we didn't put forth those 3 options and call a vote. We purposely put forth that 3rd option to say, listen, we do want the lead. We want to show the progress that this organization has truly made over the last 2 years. And this is a great demonstration of that. Unfortunately, you put that leak out there and they thought, oh, a little too much. This isn't resonating. And I'm really grateful. I remember our chief operating officer just came to me on the side, Doug Hellman, and he said, listen, it's not resonating for a reason. Go back to the drawing board. Most of the material that you've got is really dead on, and everyone's very supportive of it. Go back and make that change. And once we did come back with some alternate choices that would really fit in with the rest of the brand elements that people really did love. And I'm so glad that we did. It was a great decision. Everyone was able to see some different alternatives. And overwhelmingly, people love the 3-leaved image that we now have as our brand.
Yeah, can you talk about that a little bit, the Trillium mark, and where that came from? And you don't have to go into detail, but I think it's important that everything has meaning, and that's what's so. Like sometimes people are like, "Oh, brand," it's like it all has to mean something. It does because it represents you as an organization, and then the external prospects and families can feel that. So, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so a few different Quaker elements that we wanted to build into the brand mark to really speak back to that heritage. Number 1, simplicity. We wanted a single line that would connect the elements of Kendal. And when we think about the elements of Kendal, really the core elements are the residents of Kendal, people that live here, the team members that work here, and the leaders that guide us. And so we really thought about those 3 elements working together. And there's a great video that we shot at Kendal at Lexington, where one of the residents at Kendal at Lexington, Diane Herrick, talks about the 3 entities and how it's like a triangle, and sometimes one's at top and one's at the other top, residents, team, and leaders all working together. And that was just you couldn't have scripted that ever better. I mean, she just absolutely described exactly what we were trying to do with the Trillium. 3 equal leaves, because equality is another key aspect of our values, really working together, intersected together to really show what our organization is all about.
One more thing I want to hit on before we go into the next question is the fact that I think what you came out with, I really think that this represents who you are, and the fact that they didn't just defend their work. I just want to make sure that's clear. I see that almost every day because sometimes you have this like pride and you're kind of like, well, I really liked it and I'm the head of marketing and I'm the designer. And I just think that's so beautiful to see from an organization of, well, and like you just said, your CEO said, like, we need to change direction. And I just really value that, hearing that from an organization, to be able to do that and pivot. And then what you ended up being better and more beautiful and more tied to who you were anyway. So I feel like you had to have that little moment, that one modern to kind of get to get where you are. And I applaud you for taking the time. I know what that takes, and that patience, and going back to all the little brand, the members, what did you call them? Each one had like a core brand group from each community. I just think that's so cool. And they all felt like, I'm sure it was this feeling of, I'm a part of this team and we're developing it. And then they're telling their friends and their families and so on. And so it became, I'm assuming, just a whole Kendal heritage operation, right? We are modernizing ourselves, but we're keeping it the way it is. And I think that's really important. I do want to go into, so you're talking about the lines, and I think I want you to dig into that a little bit. So one of the things we talked about was, how do you have that consistency across the brands, but letting them all have their local identity? I think that's so interesting. Can you talk a little bit about that tagline and how you were able to then customize each community?
Yeah, it's interesting. Back, I think it was 2002. So the last kind of 2 rounds of brand evolution at Kendal, the last one was 2012. So that's been a minute. And then before that was back in the early 2000s. And back in 2012, the shift that at that time we were making with affiliates was that each affiliate had graphic elements that really, to be honest, they really celebrated some of the uniqueness. So at Oberlin, Kendal at Oberlin, for example, is very close to Oberlin College, famous for the music conservatory there. So they had a musical note that was part of their brand. Kendal and Hudson had a little wavy river as part of their brand. And so we really took away those graphical elements back in 2012 so that there could be some consistency. It was Kendal at Ithaca, Kendal on Hudson, Kendal at Lexington, to really focus on the word Kendal, and then with those locations as the secondary size. And then, of course, we have our Kendal affiliates, Enzo Village, a Kendal affiliate, Collington, a Kendal affiliate. And so those communities came to Kendal already with their own brand. And so really we needed to think about, how do we treat Enzo Village and Kendal on Hudson in a way that we can both celebrate the new colors, some consistent colors, but still keep the original heritage of that community. So Enzo Village, for example, it's particular in the red at Enzo Village. It ties back to the Zen-inspired senior living organization that's our partner at Enzo Village. And so we weren't going to get rid of that red, but that meant that we couldn't incorporate the raspberry, so their logo is black, a Kendal in black, but always using that brand mark to really tie everybody together. Kendal at Ithaca, Kendal on Hudson, Kendal at Oberlin. Those, I don't want to say were easier, but they were a little bit easier because we would keep that consistent name and that stacking, but then use the brand mark to really tie everybody together. One other big change that we did in some of the logo development is our previous logos all used the tagline, "Together Transforming the Experience of Aging," which is kind of a mouthful, and it's a kind of a font fill for a lot of little letters to be within a logo. And we found often that when people were stretching or shrinking their logos, you'd really lose that tag. It was very hard to read. So we really got rid of that and tried to make it a much more cleaner look across the organization.
So talk to me about the I don't know if you call this specifically your tagline, but the line you mentioned, the distinct in place, united by values, right? And I think I really like that, because again, this is about Kendal has their look and their design, their color, but again, how do we then distinct? We can't have, like you said, I think it was hard to have all the different icons that represented them. So talk a little bit about that and that single line drawing. I think that's so cool.
Yeah, so we're actually using that tagline, distinct in place, united by values, in a lot of different places as we're talking about the brand evolution this year. So for example, our annual report, the theme of that will be distinct in place, united by values. And we're having a brand spirit week. All of our affiliates are participating in a brand spirit week in a few weeks, where we're inviting residents and team members to participate in a single line drawing contest, where they're actually drawing parts of their community that really are unique and different. And one challenge we've had with these single line drawings, which can be great graphic, they're really nice graphic differences than just doing a stock photo or even photos of residents, just showing these graphics that are really unique to each location. one challenge we found was Lexington, Virginia. We wanted to show mountains, but not Rocky Mountains. And so really trying to find a single line drawing that shows the Shenandoah Valley has been pretty challenging. So we actually have a resident right now working on that to look at photos and then try to give us a single line drawing a la Picasso of the Shenandoah Valley that we can use as a descriptor for Kendal at Lexington. And so same thing at Kendal and Hudson, we have a sailboat, we have, of course, the musical notes for Kendal at Oberlin, just different ways to really denote that distinctiveness of each organization. And part of our Spirit Week is actually taking some of the brand elements out in the wild and taking some photos of the brand in front of distinct locations. So at Oberlin, maybe having a photo of a group of residents in front of the conservatory, or at Hudson, taking a photo of a group of team members in front of the river.
I love that so much when you said that. And I now that I've seen it too, and I'll pull that up on the screen, here I am. I'm going to geek out a little bit for my creative brain. I said this was a creative episode, but it is. I love that single line drawing, which I'll show it. So if everyone doesn't know what that means, and it shows the connection. I almost see them like, okay, we'll do one, and then we'll connect to the next one, and then we'll connect to the next one. So they're all in meaning, in theory, connected, but they're distinct to those locations. I think that's so cool. Like whoever came up with that, whatever designer did that, I really like that because it's easy to follow. Like when I saw it, I was like, oh. Like when you first mentioned it, I wasn't sure, but then when I saw it, I'm like, oh, that makes total sense. I love it. Such a great way. I see so many times just brands and this is it, and you force it, and this is what we are. This is a way for you all to be connected, doing the same thing, the same look, but they're all custom to who they are. They're a part of the process. Like, I just think it's just such a cool feature. I think it's really neat. So I'm going to pull that up on the screen so everyone can see that while we're talking about it now. I do want you to get into, okay, so you talked a little bit about, we got the brand, you talked about this event you guys were doing, this rollout, and when we talked, I said, yeah, a lot of times it is kind of forced. It's sort of, well, higher management did this. It's kind of a rollout. Well, this is what we're going to do, and this is who we are, and this is how we talk about ourselves, and rather than like an adoption, and what does this look like, and how do we launch this properly, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that process and what's that looking like now. I'm assuming it's going on right now this summer, so.
It is completely going on right now. And, it's definitely a balance. And it's one that, quite frankly, I'm learning too, because I've worked for different organizations where it is very top down, where it's, okay, corporate, you need to decide what the plan is. And then that needs to get disseminated to the T at each individual location all throughout the country. And so there's a big balance of, okay, that's not going to happen here because the ownership does have to come from the affiliates. So what's been really exciting and a wonderful surprise for me has just been seeing how creative affiliates have been with putting their own spin on the brand. And it's almost like the work that we're doing has some legs. And we're seeing, oh, okay, well, we can do this. And there's a little bit of push. And, well, I don't know, could we do it this way? Yes. And the answer is yes, do it. And let's push the envelope as much as we can to really show that we want to be distinct and we want to be unique, but then keeping that logo, keeping that Trillium in place to keep that consistency together. And actually, by everybody showing something a little bit different, that can give us the opportunity to pull all of that together in one place to show the overall strength of the organization. So that's what's been really fun for me this summer, is just seeing how people are taking this to a creative level that doesn't come from TKC marketing. It comes directly from affiliates.
Yeah, I think that's what's so important too, is it's this empowering and this ownership. I mean, you have to, you can't be so controlling and say, this is what it is. This is the realm of what it needs to lead up to. But then that customization and that ownership, I think when a community owns it and they're doing their own part, you're going to get that adoption. You're going to get, I mean, not everyone's going to love it. Of course, you can't please everyone, but at least it'll have that trickle down at the community level and the team. How is that being, I can see the residents' involvement. I can see what you're saying in terms of the competitions. How is it rolling out and adopting with the actual team members of the communities?
I think when we start providing some more swag to team members, that there's probably going to be a lot more excitement and a lot more adoption. And we actually just launched an Amazon store where people can purchase t-shirts with the new brands. They can do it in a very sustainable way, so they can get exactly the number of t-shirts and exactly the number of sizes. And I do feel like, not to say it's all about t-shirts, but t-shirts and fun swag and fun little gifts with the brand on it start to get people to see, oh, okay, this is a real thing. It's not just my email signature, but it is something that we're gonna start using. And I've noticed that each individual affiliate, while we have the Amazon store, they're kind of finding their own vendors and, hey, you know what, we're going to do these boat totes with the new logo. And so they're finding ways to really celebrate that with their team as they have team member appreciation events across the system. And so all of that is just watching the brands take off. And so this is our point, I feel like, where we can kind of sit back and say, all right, we've given all the tools, we've given the support, we're supportive of all kinds of new ideas, and then we just see where the brand goes from here.
And I know one thing we talked about when we last spoke last week was, communicating. Though you're always going to have some families and residents and or staff who are like, what does this cost me? What does this mean for me? I know my operators are probably going, okay, well, you always get that. You get that pushback. I mean, it's going to happen, right? What is this costing us? What does this mean for me? Why are we doing this? So I know you said you guys are very sensitive about it and communicating that. So what does that look like right now?
Yeah, so the overall cost that we spent with the agency plus some of the creative expenses was really pretty close to $130,000. So when you think about it, a major brand refresh across this many people, across the system, involving all those creative workshops, I think that's a very reasonable price for the work that was done. And that cost was not passed to affiliates. That's something that TKC, the Kendal Corporation, shouldered that expense in order to get the brand evolution to happen. And our support for affiliates has really been that the brand is designed intentionally, that it can be used simultaneously with the old logo. So if you still have notepads, use them up. If you still have business cards, use them up. There is no reason to tear down a perfectly good monument sign. It's just as those things need to be replaced, then you can incorporate the new brand. But purposely, we wanted to do this in a sustainable way that was going to really be supportive of operating budgets, so that a team was not certainly going to be going into any kind of debt or any kind of financial situation just because the logo has changed.
And I know one thing I think you mentioned last time was residents that were concerned too about that and about the cost. You talked about the why behind this, and now from an external perspective, right, is yes, this was all an internal practice. We wanted this to tell our story, show our values, show our mission and who we are, but it's also going to help us from an external, right, prospect perspective. If you want to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. From a resident perspective, most of the Kendal communities that are part of the Kendal system have long waiting lists. They are beautiful communities that are in wonderful markets, and they all have very long waiting lists. And so many of the residents that we talked to during our listening tour this past fall, they said, what is this whole brand thing all about? Why are we changing the logo? We don't really need to do that. We have plenty of demand, and with the baby boomers coming, plenty of new people to replace us when we're gone. And I said, you know what, that's very true and very accurate. There is very high demand. What there's not high demand for right now is team members. Or I should say, we don't have a number of team members knocking down Kendal's door saying, we really, really want to work at Kendal. And what we all need to be cognizant of as we get older is that our healthcare team members are not keeping up with the number of aging people in this country. So we've got to think about creative ways to reach those prospective team members that might not even be thinking about Kendal, but maybe giving them that introduction so that they can start to get to know us and hopefully start to think about Kendal as a career down the road. And that was an aha moment for residents. Oh, I didn't think about that. Yes, you're right. We do have a lot of open positions here, and nobody wants to come work here. We're in a really small town that's really far away. It's very expensive to live here. And so that's a challenge that our organization faces. And so that's exactly why we do something like this, is that we can really open the door to more people and elevate Kendal to other audiences.
Well, I really applaud you all for doing this. I know it can be a hefty experience, price tag. I mean, it's a long process. It's not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. I mean, I know, and the fact that you all did it in the manner you did is just nice to hear for someone who's been on the op side and the agency side and has had to roll out these types of adoptions before and has had it go not well and has had it go well. So just seeing all the different sides, I really do applaud Kendal, you all, for doing this. I think you're the perfect person to help them through this because of your skill of listening. You're a great listener. You're good at hearing what people have to say and putting that into action. And just, I think this is really important for everyone to hear. If you can recap a little bit, like people listening, thinking, wow, we need to do this, even if it's for a single site community, a huge corporation, I don't care what size you are, right? What are the top lessons that you can share for those senior living leaders after going through this process?
If I were starting from scratch all over again, I would sit down and with my core team, I would write down who is my audience. And that's going to be a varied group. And that's where I would actually start, is who needs to be part of this process and part of this decision. And of those audience members, find representation so that people can have a seat at the table throughout the process and they can feel part of it. And that intensive listening is absolutely key. And it will actually make the process go a lot faster, because I have found, I've done this in different types of organizations. Sometimes the faster you run with a brand evolution, the faster you're going to fall flat on your face and have to get up and start all the way back again with some trust building. And so finding who that audience is and figuring out a way to keep them at the table and keep listening throughout the entire process is going to be absolutely key.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think I have a quote here from when we spoke last time was, brand is culture, not just marketing. And I just want to make sure everyone hears that, like you said, it starts slow. It starts in the internal and talking to your team and talking about why are we even doing this? And it's going to be coming, and just that slow ramp up. I learned a lot hearing you talk about this. I think it's so imperative, like we said, seeing it on both sides. So thank you so much. Is there anything that we missed talking through today? I know we went through a lot, but anything more you wanted to add?
Yeah, we did. Well, people can always find out more about Kendal by visiting kendal.org. And of course, my door is always open. I have screwed up so many different things throughout my career. I'm very happy to talk to anyone who wants to pick my brain about this process or anything about Kendal. Very, very happy to speak with anyone.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for being on again. I love our conversations. I love hearing all the stories and the amazing things that you are doing. So thank you for being on. And thank you, everyone, for watching another episode of the Drake Insights podcast. We'll see you next time. Bye. Real quick, if you enjoyed watching the podcast today, please follow me and subscribe so you're notified for the next podcast. And if you have any questions or want to talk after about anything that Drake Strategic can provide for you, please reach out to me, call me, email me, or visit our website at drakestrategic.com.